Over the next few years, it grew larger and larger until it became one of the larger churches in the denomination. We relocated and built a big facility, and we were very proud of it, inordinately. I think sometimes I was even carnally connected at that point. I was very proud of that church. Not only the facility, but the people. One day I'm walking along in the church. This is several years later. I'm now a pastor, been ordained for about 3 or 4 years, had some visibility in the denomination and outside of it, had helped plant other churches, and was recognized in the community and in a very nice position in life. And I'm walking along, and I had just had this exchange with a young man in the church who I had to set straight, because he hadn't been coming to church regularly, and he came to me and he was confessing a problem that he was having, and I said, you wouldn't have this problem if you were just in the church more often. You need to be at church more often, and you need to learn to give, and you need to learn to be more involved, and there's some work and some service here that if you just get connected with that, and I preached him the party line. I laid it out for him. I said, you need to be here, man, if you're going to get this stuff straightened out. Now, I did it with a good heart and a good intent, but I preached in the party line, and as I was walking away from him, the Lord spoke to me, and He said, John, would you go to this church if you weren't paid to? Now, you've got to understand the context of this. This is years later, and this is my church. I'm the pastor. Along with another, we were co-pastors. But it was my church, and my thumbprints were all over that place. I helped design the building and select the colors and led most of the people to Christ that were there. Hundreds of them. It was my church. And God spoke to my heart and said, if you weren't paid, would you go here? And I'm walking along, and I started walking slower and slower, and I thought, no way. I don't like this place. And it was a moment of revelation for me. And I suddenly realized that I was doing something I didn't even like. And it was so staggering to me, I hurried off into my little office there, and I sat down and I thought, and in front of my desk, and I thought, what's wrong? What's wrong? Now, I want to tell you something. There's 2 or 3 prayers that God always answers. And one of the ones that He always answers is, God, what's wrong with me? If you don't want to know the answer to that, never ask it. But I asked it. I said, God, what's wrong with me? And boy, did He unload. He began showing me how I'd gotten caught up in administration and machinery, and how I'd become so mechanical and manipulative. How I'd come to a place where I loved the institution more than the body of Christ. How I'd gotten to a place where I was angered and frustrated by those that wouldn't fall in line and take their rightful places and honor and respect their duties and all. And at the same time, I had earlier on defended those same people when I was so active in converting them. And I'd come to a place where I was so institutionalized myself and so tied into its values, to its focus, that I was the worst of all the offenders. And I sat there and I began sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And I said, oh God, what's wrong? How did it get this way? And He began showing me just piece after piece, point after point, showing me how I had turned away and turned away. Again and again, the Spirit of God had spoken to me. And I had turned from the Spirit and went after the things that I thought were logical and right and orderly, and those things that would prosper, and those things that could easily be adapted into the institution, into the organization. And I had given myself over to the things not of God, but the things that were like God and for God. And I had in the process made the institution and my ministry God, and He was no longer God at all in my life. As I recognized that day, God began showing me out of the New Testament various scriptures, and showed me the relationship and the difference between the church as I knew it, the church that I had made, and the church that He made. It wasn't until years later that God spoke to me profoundly on this subject, but I understood even that day that I had begotten something that was not of God. And I cried out in my agony, and I said, oh God, get me out of here. 3 weeks later, I was gone.